There is grandeur in this view of life.
Welcome to Evolution Talk with Rick Coast, an introduction to the oldest story ever told.
The human body is a machine which winds its own springs.
In 1748, a French philosopher by the name of Julien de la Mettrie wrote a little book called L'Homme Machine, which in English is Machine Man. Now, this wasn't a book about a robotic person. Not exactly, but his point wasn't that far off. What La Mettrie was saying was that we, meaning all of mankind, are no different than anything else. Anything else being trees, flowers, birds, or even rocks. We are only different in that we are put together differently. We have a circulatory system and we're mobile. But other than that, we're not so special. Not at all. In essence, we are just biological automatons. We go about our daily business, living, breathing, and eating because that's what we are designed to do. And La Mettrie wasn't saying that that design was the result of planning. Nature did it in all of her blind, random glory. Not only that, but she pulled another fast one on us. Where we might think that we have conscious thoughts, La Mettrie was happy to tell us that we don't. Our thoughts, everything that we attribute to consciousness, is a byproduct of the organic changes going on in the folds of our brain, an epiphenomenon. We are no more in control of those apparent thought processes as we are in control of storms on the horizon. And he paints a gloomy picture. A century before La Mettrie felt impelled to knock us off of our evolutionary pedestal, Rene Descartes was busy telling us that we were special. According to Descartes,
Animals are mere machines, but man stands alone.
we were different because we could think.
I think, therefore I am.
We were separate from animals by divine right and design. The thing is, we feel like we're special. And look at the device you're listening to me on. That's an amazing piece of design. Mankind did that. Not overnight, of course, but the things we have overcome, the obstacles that we have conquered, speak to our special place in nature. Or so we like to think. So in what ways are we special or unique? Is it because we can think like Descartes said? Or is thinking just a chemical process that directs our actions, as La Mettrie would have us believe? And what does it even mean to think or to be conscious? You might be shocked to know that we don't really know. Science hasn't been able to touch it, although we are making progress. And until we are able to declare either Descartes or La Mettrie the winner of this debate to end all debates, we can all rest assured that our ability to reason, our self-awareness, the very thing that makes us appear to be special, is ours and ours alone. Or is it?
Both were astonished beyond measure at the looking glass. They looked at it every way, sideways, and with the most steady surprise. After some time, they stuck out their lips, like kissing, to the glass.
And that's Charles Darwin in 1838 describing, with amusement, what he witnessed at the London Zoo. What he was watching were two orangutans, and both had been presented with a mirror, and to the astonishment and pleasure of those looking on, nobody more than Darwin, the orangutans continued to have fun with their new toy.
They at last put a hand behind the glass at various distances. They looked over it and rubbed the front of the glass. They made faces at it and examined the whole glass. They put their body in all kinds of positions when approaching the glass to examine it.
This little show of looking at oneself in the mirror is something that we have always pointed to as being uniquely human. Even babies are able to discern that the baby looking back from the borders of a mirror might be themselves. It's the perfect test of self-awareness. There's even a name for it. It's called the mirror test. The mirror test, or mirror self-recognition test as it's also called, was developed by psychologist Gordon Gallup Jr. in 1970. Gallup was trying to show that being self-aware isn't unique to humanity. Recognizing oneself as an individual separate from the environment is something that other animals are also able to do, just as Charles Darwin witnessed in 1838 with the orangutans. They, just like us, know that the stranger in the mirror isn't a stranger at all.
When chimps see themselves in mirrors for the first time, they naturally assume it's another chimp, the way a human being who's never seen themselves before does, and begin to play with the mirror image.
That's Professor Daniel Povinelli from the University of Louisiana during a show that he was interviewed for by National Geographic. The show was called The Human Ape. Just like Darwin saw 150 years ago, primates like to play with their reflection. In this case, the primates we are talking about are our closest relatives, chimpanzees.
Chimpanzees seem to have a concept of the bodily self that allows them to look into a mirror and say, that image is equivalent to this body.
And this is the thing. They are not the only other animal who has passed the mirror self-recognition test. Also on the list are dolphins, magpies, and Asian elephants. So the hunt for intelligent life need not look towards the stars, but right here on Earth. We are not alone. We are also not the only generation to begin to realize this. Again, let's wind the clock back a little over 14 decades to a time when Darwin's The Descent of Man hit the bookshelves in London. Eager readers opened the covers to find that not only were they not special when it came to being a smart animal, but that specialness was only a little more than skin deep.
There is no fundamental difference between man and the higher mammals in their mental facilities, and that all the differences are differences of degree, not of kind.
Shortly after publishing The Descent of Man in 1871, Darwin published another book, this one called The Expressions of Emotions in Man and Animals. In this book, he outlined, categorized, and listed all of the emotions that we apparently share with other animals on the planet, all of which share a common ancestor with us, without exception. If you don't recognize that sound, it's the sound of my razor. The very first electric razor was invented and patented in 1928 by Jacob Schick. But they've come a long way since 1928. Before the razor, we may have found facial hair grooming challenging, but we weren't strangers to tools. That in itself was once considered to be a uniquely human activity, tool use. We could fill an entire episode on tool use in the animal kingdom, but we'll instead look to our friend, the chimpanzee again. And this time through the eyes of primatologist Jane Goodall. Jane Goodall has been studying chimpanzees since the 1960s, and to say that she is the leading expert on our cousins is an understatement. Before Jane came along, it was thought that chimpanzees were vegetarians. Now, she discovered not only was this not true, but they also used tools to hunt for meat, even if the meat they searched for were termites. It might sound a little gross, but it's still protein.
It was thought that humans and only humans used and made tools. When I was at school, we were defined as man, the tool maker. So that when Louis Leakey, my mentor, heard this news, he said, we must now redefine man, redefine tool, or accept chimpanzees as humans.
To come to the point at once, I beg to say that I have not the least belief in the noble savage. I consider him a prodigious nuisance and an enormous superstition. I don't care what he calls me, I call him a savage, and I call a savage a something highly desirable, to be civilized off the face of the earth. He has no moral feelings of any kind, sort, or description, and his mission may be summed up as simply diabolical.
Those words come by way of none other than Charles Dickens. Dickens was speaking out against the concept of man as a noble savage. While the term noble savage has been floating around for centuries, it really picked up steam with Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who wrote in 1754 that man was good by nature, but had been spoiled by civilization. We hate to see others suffer. I'd like to think that's true for all of us. But Dickens didn't buy it. He felt that mankind had to rise above his base nature and achieve enlightenment. But recent studies in animal behavior might just side with nature. A 2015 paper published in the journal Animal Cognition reveals that rats will save a drowning friend. And in 2003, Frans de Waal, a French primatologist, conducted a study on capuchin monkeys. I'll link to his talk about the study. The video itself is priceless. What his team did was to look at how capuchin monkeys react to unfairness. Do they care as do we if things are fair? And the way the experiment worked was this. They took 2 capuchin monkeys and handed them a small rock, which they were to then return. Monkeys like cucumbers, but they love grapes.
The one who gets cucumber, note that the first piece of cucumber is perfectly fine. The first piece he eats.
And so far, so good. The second monkey performed the same task. She was handed a rock, she returned it, and
she gets a grape. And she eats it. The other one sees that.
So when the researcher gives the first monkey the rock, she returns it and is given a cucumber again, not the grape that she was expecting. After all, her friend received the grape. So what did she do? She threw her cucumber at the researcher. Life just isn't fair. And then there's this. In an interview conducted by Andrea Sachs for Time magazine, Jane Goodall talked about one of the first chimpanzees to lose his fear around her. Now, chimps are very wary around humans at first. Now, this chimp, whom she named David Greybeard, was pushing through the forest and Jane was following him. It became rather thick, and she was afraid she was going to lose him.
And he suddenly veered through a very tangly, thorny clump of vegetation. I was crawling after him and, getting thorns in catching my clothes and everything. So I gave up. I thought, well, he'll have disappeared. But when I got through, he was sitting as though waiting. And so I sat near him, and there was a ripe red palm nut on the ground. Picked it up, because chimps love them. Held it out towards him. He turned his face away, so I put my hand closer. And he turned, he looked directly in my eyes. He reached out, he took the nut. He didn't want it, he dropped it. But he very gently squeezed my hand, which is how chimpanzees reassure each other. So that was like a communication that probably, for us, predates words.
That moment, when Jane looked into the eyes of David Greybeard, it's reminiscent of the moment when Charles Darwin looked into the eyes of Jenny the orangutan at the London Zoo almost a century and a half earlier. There was a moment of recognition there. Recognition that we are not alone on this planet. David Greybeard's act of reassurance displays an awareness of another's mental state. Now, this requires conscious knowledge of your own. Perhaps we are not so unique after all. I, for one, feel a bit comforted by that. If you don't, come back for next week's episode, and I just might be able to help you with that. Evolution Talk is written and produced by myself, Rick Coast. The music on this episode was composed and performed by Poddington Bear. And support for Evolution Talk comes from you, simply by listening. And you can always reach me by using the site's contact page at evolutiontalk.com or on Twitter, where you can find me at Rick Coast. And most of all, thank you for listening. And until next time, please take care of yourself.
Evolution Talk is a Rick Coast production.